Okay, so we are picking up our introductory remarks for questions. I'm still on page 5 of the Simplified Guidelines. Let's talk about quotation questions. Quotation questions, quotation completion questions, essence questions, and essence completion questions. These are all real similar, so I'm going to cover these all in this video. So a quotation question requires a perfect quotation as an answer from a complete verse or verses. When you are in XP or Silver Division, the verses that are asked for have to come from what we call a primary verse. It's those verses that have the solid black dot beside them. Those are the only ones that can be asked for. So when those are asked and the quizzer is answering, just like in JBQ, their answer has to be word for word perfect. They can't add words, they can't leave words out, they can't stutter, they can't even leave out a syllable. The only thing that might be okay is if they mispronounce, say, a individual's name or geographical location. As long as we can still recognize what it is they're saying, that's okay. But otherwise, it has to be word for word perfect. It has to be the first time. They can't mess it up the first time and then, oh, I still have time left, let me try it again. No, their first time through, it has to be perfect. Okay. An example of a quotation question, because there's different ways that they can be asked. Here's one way. Quotation question from the section titled Jesus Talks with a Samaritan Woman. Quote the closing verse. So in that instance, the quizzer would have to quote John 4:26. Okay, quote the closing verse. Another way to ask it would be quotation question. Quote verse 34 from the first chapter. The quizzer would know that they'd have to quote 134. Both of those, though, have to be word for word perfect. And if I did this right, I'm not positive I did, those should both be primary verses, those black dot verses, for the XP quizzers and for Silver quizzers. So that's a quotation question. An essence question is one that the quizzers will hear a lot. And these are nice because they're just like quotation questions, except they don't have to give them word for word. So a lot less pressure. If they stumble, if they don't get it exactly right the first time, they can go back, they can do it again. So super nice. I like those. An example of one of those, we can use those same quotation questions we just used, and we'll just switch out the words quote for given essence. So for example, essence question from the section titled Jesus Talks with a Samaritan Woman. Give in essence the closing verse. So instead of quote the closing verse, we're just going to say give in essence the closing verse. The quizzer needs to give it in essence. Boom, done. Okay. The quizzers their goal should just be to quote the verse, whether it's quotation or give in essence. That's the best way to go about it. But if they don't quote it and it's essence, they're still okay. All right. So next is quotation completion question. This one's a little bit different. The answer is still going to have to be quoted word for word, but how it's different is that it requires a perfect quote, and it must be completed from a verse. Let me give you the example question. I think that's going to help a lot right here. Where did I go? Quotation completion question from John chapter 3. Finish this verse, quote, everyone who does. That's what the quizmaster would say. They're going to say something like, finish this verse or finish this sentence. Then they'll say the word quote, and then they'll give the first 3 words that are straight from the scripture. When the quizzer buzzes in, the quizmaster will stop where they're reading. Maybe they've only said one of those words that are straight from the scripture. If so, then they stop and the quizzer has to pick up right there. The quizzer does have the option to go back and start at the beginning of the verse. That's what I like to do. It's kind of hard for me to start 2 or 3 words in, but they can just pick up right where the quizmaster left off. So, for example, if the quizmaster said, finish this verse, quote, everyone, beep, and the quizzer hits right there, all the quizzer has to say is, who does evil hates the light and will not come into the light for fear that their deeds will be exposed. The quizzer doesn't have to repeat that word the quizmaster just said. Okay, so again, a quotation completion question, the quizzer does have to quote the verse word for word, but it's kind of similar to a scripture text question. It has that in the question, it has that word quote and then some words straight from the scripture. Okay, essence completion question, just like quotation completion question, except this time the quizzer doesn't have to quote it. They just give it in essence. So we could take that same question we just did, the quotation completion question. This time we're going to make it an essence completion question. A lot less pressure for the quizzer. Here it is. Essence completion question from John chapter 3. Finish in essence this verse, quote, everyone who does. Okay, let's say no one buzzes in. The quizmaster is going to wait 5 seconds. That question's going to be dead. It means no one hits it, and they move on to the next question. Okay, that's an essence completion question. I think we're going to stop right there. So we covered quotation questions, essence questions, quotation completion questions, and essence completion questions.